Hello everybody, my name is Mary Bingham and I do all the videos for this YouTube channel, and welcome to episode 2 of Wednesdays with Winthrop Jr. This letter again takes place from John Winthrop Sr., who wrote this letter at Groton, and he wrote it again to John Winthrop Jr., who was still at Trinity College in Dublin at this time. And the letter begins, "To my beloved son, John Winthrop, at the college near Dublin, Ireland. My beloved son, I beseech the Lord to bless thee. With grace and peace I give him thanks for thy welfare, and hope through his mercy that this infirmity which is now upon thee shall turn to thy health. I received 2 letters from thee written, I perceive, in haste, but they were welcome to me, and the rest to your grandmother, mother, etc., who all rejoice in your good liking." And again, this grandmother would have been John Sr.'s mother, Anne Winthrop. And the mother of John Winthrop Jr. would have been Margaret Tyndall Winthrop, John Sr.'s 3rd wife. But I'm going to go back to Anne Winthrop, John Sr.'s mother. Because this story gets a little bit interesting between her and her daughter-in-law. So this is really interesting. Anne Winthrop was born Anne Brown and married Adam Winthrop as his 2nd wife on the 20th of February in 1579. On at least 2 occasions, Anne proved to be a woman who spoke her mind to the point of physically alienating those with whom she disagreed. The first person who went flying from the Winthrop house was another woman, also by the name of Anne Winthrop, who was the wife of Adam's nephew, Joshua, who lived in London. I will refer to the 2nd Anne Winthrop as Anne the Younger. Anne the Younger was having marital issues with Joshua and moved from London to another local's house at Groton. Adam found out she was in town and persuaded Anne the Younger to pay him a visit. Anne the Younger accepted and came to call on a Sabbath day. The elder Anne did not approve of what she deemed the fancy attire worn by Anne the Younger. Heated words were exchanged after the first sermon of that day, causing Anne the Younger to exit stage left very quickly. People must have been in wonderment during the 2nd sermon, as there was no sight of the younger Anne. And the whispers must have been loud that afternoon as people wondered, what happened? Where did she go? What caused her to leave so quickly? Not showing up to lecture was something people back in those days just did not do. And since Anne the Younger was there in the morning, but not in the afternoon, the argument must have been pretty bad. However, the actual house where Anne the Younger stayed was robbed, leaving her without barely any clothing. So she held her head high and moved in with the elder Anne and Adam. But elder Anne was a diehard faithful and couldn't just close her mouth when Anne the Younger refused to attend church service. A war of words led Anne the Younger to leave Groton Manor immediately and eventually return to London to her husband. Another example of elder Anne's alienation involved her daughter-in-law, Mary Phones Winthrop, which again would have been John Jr.'s wife. John Sr.'s wife. I apologize. When John Sr. married Mary IV in 1605 or 1606 Old Style, they bounced back and forth between her family home of Great Stambridge in Essex and his home in Groton. But because Mary had no close female relatives at Great Stambridge, the young couple made their way to Groton just before John Jr. was born, possibly so that Anne could help with the delivery of her grandson. The week that John Jr. was born was not a good week up until his birth. John Sr. was sick with what was then known as the ague. Today we know it to be a serious fever and chills so severe that one could barely get out of bed. He felt guilty that he couldn't be productive, describing himself as behaving with negligence and idleness, which was unacceptable to him in the eyes of God, even when he was on the slow mend, because John Sr. believed in constant work and prayer. So it was just not acceptable to him that he couldn't get up and do things that he would have wanted to do. Though John Sr. makes it very clear that his mother and wife had a heated argument that week, he doesn't say whether or not it was before the birth of John Jr. Either way, it must have been the row from possible past quarrels or tension buildup to cause John Sr. to ultimately explode at both women to knock it off. And we know from his writing that he did seek forgiveness from God, but what we don't know is if he actually asked his mother and his wife for their forgiveness. But peace between Anne and Mary was not immediate. John Sr. made the decision to move Mary and infant John Jr. back to He made the decision to move Mary and John Jr. back to Great Stambridge permanently in April of 1607, and she was to move back there and be with her father. John followed in September when some of her father's land was transferred over to him, and this land may have been part of the dowry that Mary brought with her to her marriage. The relationship between Anne and Mary warmed just enough so that they could visit each other from time to time. But this document is important not only because it establishes the relationship of the family around the time that John Jr. was born, but it is also important because it makes clear that John Jr. was indeed born at Groton Manor and not at Great Stambridge, which is where some people believe that he was born. So now we're going to fast forward back to 1622. The responses from John Jr. to John Sr.'s first letters don't seem to be in the Winthrop papers. Therefore, they might have been in another collection unknown to me, or they may have been lost. As is the case, I can't offer any explanation as to why John Jr. responded in haste. There could be so many different reasons. But I can picture the scene as follows. The latter arrives from a family acquaintance. The letter arrives from a family acquaintance or friend. John Sr. is surrounded by his wife and his stepmother, and as well as other family members, as they anticipate how John Jr. has responded. How is he doing? What news does he have for them? Then John Sr. opens the letter and discovers the short response. He may have felt somewhat disappointed, though the family was relieved to hear that John was okay, even though they were probably disappointed. When John Sr. said the responses were probably, quote unquote, written in haste, reminds me of when a parent today will text their teenager and the teen responds with a simple, okay. I'm sure that drives some parents bananas. John Sr. probably felt the same, almost like, could you elaborate a little more, please? Or could you give me a little more time with your response? Then John Sr. goes on to write, I sent you 2 letters a good while since, which I hope you will not miscarry. Though they be long in going, the further you are from me, the more careful I am of your welfare, both in body and soul. This letter was written at Groton Manor, which is 640 kilometers, about 400 miles, from Trinity College at Dublin. Today, that is a 9-hour car ride clear across England with a boat trip across the Isle of Man. And even more important, this is John Sr.'s eldest child to spread his wings. Of course, John Sr. is concerned for John Jr.'s welfare, especially being so far from home. Then John Sr. goes on to write, "The chief means whereof lieth in your own endeavor, your friends may pray and counsel you, but your own diligence and watchfulness must be added to make you blessed." John Sr. seemed to remind his son to not only rely on the advisement of his friends, but to be considerate that his happiness lies not in meat, drink, and clothes and bodily refreshings, but also in the favor of God, and more important, in the favor of God, for his part of a better, or in a better. And then he's saying, as just a reminder, Dad says, though you have material wealth, true happiness lies in being right with God. Then he goes on to write, "I propose to send you by this bearer such books as you write for. Only Aristotle I cannot, because your uncle Phones is not at London to buy it, and I know not whether you would have Latin or Greek." This is huge because now we're truly understanding that John Jr. was very learned and extremely intelligent in order to be able to get those books and to be able to read and understand in two entirely different languages. The two bearers that are mentioned in this letter are John Nutton and Mr. Olmsted. John Nutton will be discussed in the coming weeks, but Mr. Olmsted was Richard Olmsted, a graduate of Emmanuel College, whose early origins are unknown to me at this time. In 1622, he was a rector of Irwerton at Suffolk, England, in the Stour Valley region, before moving himself and his ministry to the Mountrath plantation in current County Laos, Ireland. This is where John Jr. stayed again with his Downing relatives while a student at Trinity, as we discussed last week. Now, Uncle Phones would have been Thomas Phones, a beloved friend and brother-in-law to John Sr., being the husband to John Sr.'s sister, Anne Winthrop. The lives of Thomas and John Sr. seemed quite intertwined, even though Thomas was about 15 years older than John Sr. Both men were legally trained, owned stakes at Groton Manor, though John Sr.'s ownership was obviously more significant, and they both took care of each other's children. Both John Jr. and his brother Henry lived with Uncle Thomas and Aunt Anne Phones, and both John Jr. and Henry would marry their daughters. That's right. Their aunt and uncle would become their father and mother-in-law, their cousins would become their sisters-in-law, and the two brothers would also become brothers-in-law. The Phones seemed to enjoy having John Jr. live with them. Henry, however, was a different story due to his incredible misbehavior. And this would have caused Thomas so much stress during his final illness in 1629. And you will hear more about that situation in the coming episodes. Thomas Phones lived at London, where he owned what is today considered to be a pharmacy. The practice was referred to as the Three Fawns of Old Bailey, and would have been on the ground level near the outer boundaries of the city. The family lived upstairs in what we would today consider to be spacious quarters, but back in those days, I just read in a brand new book that I bought today, it was tight quarters for them. But they lived upstairs, and Thomas prepared the medicinal recipes, which John Jr. would have known about and influenced possibly his own later medical alchemical interests and practice. The Bailey was the outer ancient wall which enclosed and protected the city of London. A portion of the wall that survives, actually I have pictured in my documents, and anybody who wants to see the picture that I have, please feel free to send a comment down below and I'll be in touch and I can send you that picture. And Thomas's house and business may have been located nearby one of the ancient ruins that stands today. The Old Bailey is a building where the criminal court cases are heard for London and Wales. Then John Sr. goes on to write, I propose to send you some cloth for a gown and suit, but for study gown, you are best to buy some coarse Irish cloth. So the study gown would have been similar to a judge's robe today. It was worn over the outer clothing and indicated an academic status, but it was made of a heavier material than the regular English cloth, which is why John Sr. strongly recommended that he get the cloth in Ireland. And John Sr. goes on to write, I shall write you again by Mr. Olmsted. For the carriage of such things as I send you by John Nutten, you must remember to pay him, because I cannot tell you what they will come to. I have written to your uncle to send over my gelding. If you see that he forget it, you may put him in mind. So that would have been Uncle Emmanuel Downing. And the gelding, I believe, is a castrated horse, which John Sr. may have kept on the Downing estate. And then John Sr. goes on to write, your grandfather and grandmother will write to you. Your mother salutes you with her blessing. We are all in good health, I praise God. Remember my love to your good tutor. The Lord in mercy bless and keep you and direct you and prosper your study. Amen. So I rest your loving father, John Winthrop. Groton, August 31st, 1622. Thank you. And I will have links to the next episode, which will be May 8th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And I will have that in both the description of this video as well as in the comment section. And also please like and subscribe to this channel. And I promise that I will have more videos about John Winthrop Jr. and his family coming in the next few months. Thank you very much, everybody.